Hi, my name is Andriana Boudouraki, and I'm one of the co-authors of this paper, along with Stuart, Reeves, Joel Fischer, and Sean Rintel. So, Mobile Robotic Telepresence, or MRP, is a video conferencing system on a robotic base that can be controlled remotely. So it lets the user move around in space and have physical presence. So we have the remote user who is controlling the robot, and the local users who are in the same environment as the robot. The technology has been developing since the late 90s, and companies like Double, Gobi, and Omni have still been developing and marketing new models in the recent years. It has been used in a variety of settings, such as education, healthcare, and offices, and more recently, some studies also looked at use at home for connecting partners and family. It has been mostly seen as useful and well received, and yet the technology is still not mainstream, and interactions via MRP are not yet sufficiently examined in detail. Our motivation for this study was to examine MRP interactions in detail and in depth, looking at MRP on its own right, rather than comparing whether it is richer than other media in terms of how well it imitates the in-person experience. We also sought to examine the medium's capacity for intimate interactions in the setting of the home. The study took place whilst we were mostly under lockdown measures, working from home and not able to visit our loved ones. Finally, we wanted to do that whilst looking at long-term habitual use, such as that novelty effects would be eliminated. So we adopted an ethnomethodology and conversation analysis approach, which looks at users' situated actions and basically what people do in the moment to accomplish a shared understanding and communicate. We conducted an autobiographical ethnography where I put myself in the position of the user. So I had a Double 3 telepresence robot in my home for 6 months and used it to connect with friends and family. For the study, we present the interactions with the main remote users that I had, who were my partner and my mother, who visited me via the MRP weekly during the 6-month period. In the paper, we present 4 fragments of very typical interactions that occur during those visits. So we take instances of interactions and break down what the users are doing turn by turn in terms of verbal and embodied actions, and how they use those to establish a shared understanding of the situation. So specifically, we show instances of arrivals and departures, as well as instances of looking at things together in the environment with the remote user, and of simply being together or dwelling. From there, we summarize our findings in 3 themes that characterize MRP interactions in the setting of the home. So those are all related to the medium's mobility, which is what sets it apart in a way. So the ways in which mobility impacts the interactions are by granting the remote user access to the local environment, giving the remote user autonomy, and requiring the local user to accommodate the remote. With regards to access in the local environment, of course, the remote user is able to move around the entire flat unless blocked by closed doors. And so they can look at anything from any angle. So this renders the entire home as the setting of the interaction. So in the paper, we discuss how, based on Goffman's presentation of the self, this makes the home, which is normally someone's backstage, part of their presented self. Therefore, this meant seeing the home in a different way and having to make decisions about its presentation as well, especially given the possibility of impromptu unannounced visits. But even in the case of planned visits, this expanded the time frame of the activity so that the activity began at the pre-visit preparation rather than at the start of the call. So next, what the mobility does is give the remote user more autonomy. They're not on par with the local user, as the 2 users still have different abilities, but the remote is able to act on their own accord. So they can choose where to look and what to look at and what to topicalize and bring into the conversation. And in the case of intimate interactions, this autonomy allows the user to express interest and commitment in the relationship. So for example, they can move closer to look at you and what you're doing, and it comes across as something that they chose to do on their own. They're able to express themselves more and be more spontaneous, as they don't have to ask before doing what they want. And therefore, we also have more playfulness, which is something we showcase in the fragments in the paper. There is also the possibility for multitasking and collaboration. So, for example, the remote user can be checking things in the flat and whilst the local user is preparing a meal, and at the same time have a conversation going on between the two. And ultimately, it is possible through this autonomy to have both users mutually together and without actively requesting it of each other, orient towards something together so that it truly feels like a shared moment. The other side of that is that the local user has to accommodate the remote user's spontaneous behavior, whilst also in a way caring for the robot. So we found that the local user would monitor and respond to the remote user rather than always be the one leading the interaction. So this could look like the local user positioning their body so that their face is visible to the remote user, or moving out of their way to avoid collisions. In the case of mediated intimacy, we could say that this is a benefit of the medium as it gives both parties opportunities to express commitment and care for each other. And in the paper, we refer to studies from computer-mediated intimacy literature and discuss in more detail the degree to which the MRP is suitable for that kind of interaction. In conclusion, we find that whilst the mobility of the medium adds a lot to the interactions, it is not the mobility itself that is important, but rather the autonomy that it grants to the remote user, allowing them to be on a more equal place to the local in terms of agency and expression. And so the MRP allows for mediated closeness, not by imitating real presence, but by giving both parties, the remote and the local, the means to be spontaneous and expressive and show interest and commitment within the interaction. Thank you for listening. If you found this interesting, I hope that you will read our paper and reach out if you have any questions or comments.